My brother banned my Puerto Rican girlfriend from his wedding, claiming she wasn't appropriate for his social circle. But let's be honest, he's not even appropriate for our family, let alone hers. Brad, my brother, is getting married next month to his fiancée, Jules. Just last week, he called me and told me that my girlfriend, Yasmin, was no longer invited to the wedding. His reason? Apparently, she doesn't share the values suited for the kind of elegant event they're planning. But honestly, this didn't come out of nowhere. Yasmin and I have been together for 2 years. She's a kindergarten teacher and coaches youth soccer on weekends. She grew up in a big Puerto Rican family where everyone talks loud, laughs louder, and shows affection without holding back. That's just her nature. And she's never once been rude or disrespectful to anyone in my family. My family, on the other hand, is what you'd call reserved. My parents run a small accounting firm, structure is in their DNA. They raised Brad and me to be quiet, polite, and above all else, never make a scene. Brad followed that rulebook to the letter. He became a lawyer. He's marrying his college girlfriend, who's also a lawyer. They live in a whisper-quiet suburb where people murmur over dinner like they're in a meditation retreat. Honestly, the only thing missing is for him to knock up his future lawyer wife and raise a whole new generation of little lawyers. The tension first bubbled up during my parents' anniversary dinner. We were at this upscale restaurant downtown. The whole family was there, my aunt, my uncle Jim, and their twin daughters who are both in med school. Yasmin was telling us this sweet story about one of her students who had finally learned to tie his shoes after weeks of trying. She was genuinely excited, and her voice naturally rose as she described how proud the kid was. She wasn't yelling, she was just expressive. I saw Jules lean in and whisper something to Brad. He looked at her like Yasmin had just burped in the middle of the table. Later that night, Brad texted me, asking if I could talk to Yasmin about keeping her voice down during family events. I told him she hadn't done anything wrong, and maybe he was the one who needed to chill out. Things really escalated at Easter dinner 3 months ago. My mom had cooked up a big meal and invited Brad's future in-laws. His father-in-law is a top corporate executive, and his mother-in-law runs a charity for wealthy women. They brought along their other daughter, Rebecca, who had just graduated from some fancy private university. During dinner, Rebecca started going on and on about her semester abroad in France, museums, wine tastings, the whole 9 yards. Yasmin tried to join the conversation by sharing her experience teaching English to immigrant kids, including some Haitian students who spoke French. She spoke with passion about how hard these kids work to learn, even with limited resources. Her voice rose again, not from volume, but from pure emotion, while telling us about a boy who had written her a thank you note in English. She even pulled out her phone to show us the note. Brad's future mother-in-law made a face like someone had served her spoiled fish. Then she said something about how teaching was a very noble profession, but only for people who weren't looking for a real challenge in life. I watched Yasmin's face change for a second. But she just smiled and said teaching was exactly what she wanted to do. The rest of the evening was painfully awkward. Brad kept shooting me daggers every time Yasmin spoke at anything above a murmur. Like we were all supposed to be sitting in total silence, waiting to hear one of his high-and-mighty little farts. 2 weeks after Easter, Brad invited me to a wine tasting event that Jules had organized through her law firm. One of those networking nights where everyone wears tailored suits and talks about stock portfolios or tax strategy. I actually asked Brad if he was sure Yasmin would fit in, and he said it would be good for her to see what his social circle was like. Big mistake. The wine tasting was packed with lawyers, accountants, and business owners, all speaking in hushed tones like they were afraid of disturbing the wine. Yasmin really tried to go with the flow, but she's not fake. When someone asked about her job, she lit up talking about her students. When another guest mentioned they had kids, Yasmin offered some genuinely helpful tips for handling homework stress. Jules's boss, a senior partner at her firm, was there with his wife. They both seemed really interested in what Yasmin was saying about child development, until she laughed at something funny. Her laugh is loud, sure, but it's real and joyful. The boss raised an eyebrow and said her laugh was peculiar. His wife, on the other hand, actually smiled and said it was refreshing to meet someone authentic at one of these things. Apparently, we're not the only ones who think these events are boring as hell. Still, I could see Brad tensing up across the room. He kept hovering around, jumping into our conversations, trying to redirect them like a social traffic cop. By the end of the night, he was practically glued to Yasmin, monitoring every word she said like she was on trial. The last straw came last month, at my cousin's engagement party. She was celebrating 3 years with her fiancé and threw a backyard barbecue. Way more casual than anything we'd been to before. I thought Yasmin would finally be in her element. She brought homemade cookies, which were a massive hit with the kids. She played ball with them and helped my aunt with decorations. Everyone loved her. At one point, my cousin even pulled me aside to say how lucky I was to be with someone so warm and fun. But then the karaoke started. My cousin's fiancé had rented a machine, and everyone was taking turns singing. When they asked for volunteers, Yasmin stepped up and sang a cheerful Spanish song her grandmother used to sing to her. The whole family clapped, well, almost the whole family. Even my usually grumpy grandfather smiled and asked her to teach him some Spanish words. But Brad just sat there with his arms crossed like he had a gas bubble trapped inside him that he didn't know how to release. After the party, Brad cornered me. He said Yasmin was too much for family events. Jules chimed in, claiming that Yasmin always tried to be the center of attention and that her behavior didn't align with the family's vibe. He said Jules's family would never accept someone so loud and inappropriate. I asked him if it was really about style, or if he was just being a racist. Brad told me I needed to decide what was more important, my relationship with my family or my relationship with someone who refused to fit in. Last week, Brad called with a wedding update. He said he and Jules had been reviewing the guest list and decided Yasmin would feel more comfortable, not having to worry about fitting in with Jules's family and friends. He insisted it wasn't personal. He claimed their wedding was a sophisticated event, and they needed guests who understood that. I asked him straight out, was he uninviting my girlfriend because he didn't like where she came from? He said no, it wasn't about that, it was about what was appropriate for the occasion. Then he added that if I truly cared about Yasmin, I wouldn't want to put her in a situation where she might feel out of place. I told him that was his choice, but if Yasmin wasn't welcome, then neither was I. Brad went quiet for a long moment. Then he said he hoped I'd reconsider because I was prioritizing something that doesn't hold much value over the family, which apparently does hold value. He added that Yasmin would understand if I explained it to her, in terms she could comprehend. I hope he understood my response when I hung up the phone without saying a word. Since then, my mom called and said she understood Brad's position, but hoped we could find some middle ground. My dad sent me a message saying family events were already stressful enough without added drama. Jules even called me herself, claiming she didn't want to hurt anyone, but that their wedding needed to maintain a certain atmosphere. The only person who hasn't pressured me is my grandfather. He called me yesterday and said he hoped to see Yasmin at the wedding. When I told him she wasn't invited anymore, I could tell he was not pleased. Then he said something that stuck with me, in my day, men didn't abandon the women they loved just because others had opinions. My aunt also reached out. She told me she thought Brad was making a mistake and that Yasmin brought life to our family gatherings. My grandfather is one of those rare, wise souls who can put into words what I was already feeling. He said men don't walk away from the women they love, and ever since Brad's call, I've known I won't be going to a fancy wedding without Yasmin. It's not something I ever thought of as a man's decision. It's just something I would do. The wedding is in 3 weeks. Brad texted me yesterday asking if I'd changed my mind. He said he hoped we could move past this disagreement and also mentioned that he had already told people I would be there, and that backing out now would be inconvenient. I replied, if I show up, should I wear a white hood, or is that part of the theme too? His response, stop joking. Think about it. We really want you there. I don't know what's left to think about. I'm supposed to accept his fiancée into the family, but he can't do the same with my girlfriend. And that's despite the fact that there are plenty of things about his fiancée that I don't particularly like. Update 1. The wedding went ahead as planned last weekend. My parents called the night before, making one last attempt to convince me to go. But I spent the wedding day with Yasmin. It wasn't spectacular, but we finally did a few things we'd been putting off, and it was a good day. She knew what was going on. She even suggested that I should go if I felt torn. But what I felt was that I shouldn't. So I didn't. And I don't regret it. The day after the wedding, my aunt called. She said the ceremony was beautiful, but several people asked about me, and about Yasmin. I'll admit I was a little jealous that more people asked about her than about me. But honestly, that's normal. She has this light in her that draws people in. It's one of the things I love most about her. Apparently, Brad told everyone I was sick and that Yasmin stayed behind to take care of me, instead of telling the truth about why we didn't show up. But what my aunt told me next is what really shocked me. During the reception, she overheard a conversation between Jules and her mother. They were saying how happy they were that I didn't bring my Puerto Rican girlfriend, that now, the day could be perfect. Brad's future mother-in-law even said, people like that don't understand proper manners. She also told me that my grandfather overheard the conversation, and silently walked away from their table. 2 days after the wedding, I got a call from my grandfather. He said Brad had something important to tell me. Apparently, after hearing what Jules's mother said, Grandpa decided to have a little talk with Brad at the reception. He asked Brad directly if the real reason Yasmin wasn't invited was because she's Puerto Rican. Brad got defensive. He said it had nothing to do with race. He claimed it was about personality differences and social compatibility. So Grandpa asked him, if that's the case, why did those differences only seem to bother him after he started dating Jules? Brad couldn't answer. Grandpa said Brad looked like a kid caught in a lie. Then Brad said something that made Grandpa even angrier. He claimed that this was his wedding, and that Grandpa should be mad at me for skipping a family event over someone who didn't fit the family's values or social circle. Grandpa told him, that's not the family I raised. He said excluding someone because of where they come from, or because of their personality, was wrong. And that Brad should be ashamed of himself. Then Grandpa left the reception early. 2 nights ago, we had dinner with Grandpa. He asked Yasmin about her work, her family, and her future plans. When she told him she wanted to start a program to help immigrant kids learn English, he offered to help her draft a proposal to apply for a grant. By the end of dinner, they were laughing together over his attempts to learn Spanish phrases on some app on his phone. Yasmin promised to teach him for real if he was serious about it. But the family drama isn't over. Yesterday, I got a text from Brad. He said he heard I had dinner with Grandpa, and that he was disappointed I was trying to turn family members against him. He said he hoped I was happy with the division I was causing. I didn't reply. But it pissed me off. I never asked Grandpa to confront him at the wedding. I wasn't even there. I never asked anyone in the family to take sides. They saw what happened. And they made up their own minds. Now, I actually feel closer to some family members than I did before. My grandfather has been calling regularly to check in on both of us. My aunt invited us to her daughter's birthday party next month. Even my cousin messaged me, saying she was sorry about everything that happened and hoped Yasmin and I would keep coming to family events. So at least not everything that came out of this has been bad. The fact that the decent side of the family has accepted Yasmin and stood by us, it's honestly been a great filter to see who's worth keeping around. Update 2. Okay, so I've got more family drama for you. Turns out my cousin knew that Brad's wife had convinced our parents that Yasmin had to go. Her plan was to use family events to either pressure my girlfriend into changing, to be more like us, or to push her to the point where she'd break up with me, so I could eventually bring someone better into the family. I decided to talk to Brad directly, because if anyone was bringing someone inappropriate into this family, it was him. He agreed to meet up, probably thinking I was ready to apologize and make peace. I started by asking him to be completely honest. Why wasn't Yasmin invited to the wedding? He gave me the same tired excuse, that she was too loud and inappropriate for his social circle. So I told him everything our cousin had shared. He denied that Jules had ever said such things, but I could tell he was lying. Eventually, he admitted that some of what his wife had said was true. Brad told me Jules came from a successful family with important connections, and that those relationships were valuable to his future. He said Yasmin was a good person, but didn't bring anything useful to the table. I asked him, was he seriously saying he judged people based on their usefulness to his career? Brad said I was being naive. He told me that if I thought all relationships weren't at least partially strategic, then I had no idea how the real world worked. He said successful people surround themselves with other successful people, and that sometimes, that means making hard choices. When I pointed out that Yasmin had a college degree and a professional job, Brad just shrugged and said being a teacher wasn't the same as being a lawyer or a business executive. According to him, Jules's friends were married to doctors, executives, and entrepreneurs, not elementary school teachers. I told him he sounded like a pretentious snob and that he was judging Yasmin based on classist stereotypes. He said I was being emotional, and that one day, when I was older and more focused on building a serious career, I'd understand his perspective. Then he said something that completely ended whatever relationship we had left. He told me that if I wanted to waste my potential on someone who would hold me back professionally and socially, that was my choice. But he wasn't going to pretend all relationships were equal, or that our family had to accept partners who didn't meet their standards. I walked out without saying goodbye. On the way home, I called my parents and told them about the conversation. My mom said she was disappointed in Brad's attitude but still believed our family could get past this. My dad was more blunt. He admitted Brad's comments were out of line, but also said maybe Brad wasn't thinking clearly, that maybe he didn't really believe what he was saying and was just trying to justify a decision he already felt locked into. That night, I called my grandfather and told him everything. He was angry, but not surprised. He also said he was proud of me, for standing up to Brad directly instead of letting the situation drag on. Then he told me something I hadn't known. Apparently, he had tried to talk to my parents about Brad. But like they did with me, they brushed off his concerns. 2 days after my conversation with Brad, I got a call from Jules. Brad had told her what happened and she wanted to clear the air between us. She asked if we could meet for lunch so she could explain her side of things. Jules started by saying she regretted how complicated everything had become and never meant to hurt anyone's feelings. She said Yasmin was probably a very good person, but that she didn't have the background or social skills to function in the kinds of professional circles she and Brad moved in. When I asked her what she meant by social skills, she said things like knowing when to speak and when to listen, reading subtle social cues, adapting your behavior to different settings. She claimed these weren't things you could teach, they came from growing up in certain environments. When I told her that sounded classist, she got defensive and insisted she wasn't being classist, she was just being realistic. The lunch ended badly. Jules said she had hoped I would be more mature about the situation, but it was clear I was determined to be difficult. She claimed she and Brad had tried to handle things diplomatically, but that I was starting to adopt some of Yasmin's bad habits. That night, I told Yasmin about both conversations. She was sad that I had lost my relationship with my brother, but she was also grateful that I had been willing to uncover the truth. She told me she had been thinking about whether she should step back from our relationship, so she wouldn't cause more issues with my family. When I asked her not to even consider that, she said she needed to know I was choosing her because I wanted to, not because I felt some obligation to defend her. But I am choosing her. Because she's the best person I know. Because our relationship makes me happy. And if we're being honest, my relationship with my brother and his wife? That hasn't brought me happiness in a long time. My brother and I don't just have different personalities, we have fundamentally different values. When we were kids, I used to think we were similar people who just expressed ourselves differently. But now? Brad is still exactly the same, just more of an asshole. My parents still hope Brad and I will reconcile one day. I think they'll be waiting a while. Honestly, someone should probably tell them they're more likely to die of old age than to ever see me make peace with my brother. Because I doubt Brad will ever learn to see people beyond their bank account or their social status. Update 3. About a month ago, we had dinner at my parents' house. Brad and his wife were invited too. It turned out to be a kind of ambush. Thankfully, Yasmin wasn't there. My mom suggested that maybe we could agree to respect each other's decisions and focus on maintaining the family bond despite our differences. That actually sounded pretty reasonable to me. Unfortunately, Brad also thought it sounded reasonable, on the condition that I accepted his decisions about the wedding as final and agreed to stop holding a grudge. He said he missed having me as a brother and hoped we could go back to having a normal relationship. When I asked if he planned to apologize for how he and Jules had treated Yasmin, he said there was nothing to apologize for. They had simply made the best decisions for their wedding and their marriage. He wasn't about to say sorry for prioritizing his wife's comfort and their shared social goals. My dad was visibly frustrated. According to him, Brad was making a huge effort to compromise, and I was the one clinging to the drama. But I don't see it that way. Brad hasn't made a single compromise. All he's done is repeat that he didn't do anything wrong and that I need to give in, because he won't budge an inch. The conversation went downhill from there. Brad said he was tired of me making him look bad, and Jules complained about being called a classist over some tiny misunderstandings. I left my parents' house telling them not to invite me again, because I had no interest in going in circles over the same pointless argument. 2 weeks after that dinner, my grandfather had a mild heart attack. It wasn't life-threatening, but it did require a short hospital stay and a longer recovery at home. The entire family came together to support him, including Brad and Jules. At the hospital, Brad and I managed to have civil conversations focused solely on Grandpa's health. We didn't bring up our personal issues, but we coordinated visits and helped organize his care. For a few days, we had a fragile peace. But of course, it didn't last. After Grandpa was discharged, I brought Yasmin over to visit him. She was concerned and wanted to bring him homemade soup and a few books she thought he'd enjoy. Brad and Jules were already there when we arrived. Grandpa thanked her for the soup and the books. Later that night, Brad texted me, saying Yasmin wasn't the right person to be around Grandpa because he needed rest. I told him that maybe he should suggest that to Grandpa, and let me know how that went. Like an idiot, he actually did. And Grandpa banned him from visiting for a while. Seems like he prefers Yasmin over his own grandson and his boring wife. Those were Grandpa's exact words when he called me to explain what had happened. My parents were upset and tried to talk some sense into him, but he told them to leave him alone, and to stop worrying about his health. Because, and I quote, "If I have to sit through one more visit from your brother and his wife, I'd rather die of a heart attack than die of boredom." He said Yasmin's visit was the most fun and lively he'd had. Even his doctor encouraged him to stay upbeat, not depressed. And uninviting my brother? That might just be part of the recovery plan. A few weeks ago, Yasmin was accepted into a graduate program. She's thrilled about the opportunity to help even more kids succeed in school. When I told Grandpa about her acceptance, he said he wanted to take us both out for dinner to celebrate her achievement. At that dinner, Grandpa made a toast. He said he was proud to know someone who's dedicating her life to helping children learn and grow. To him, teachers are the backbone of society, and anyone who doesn't recognize that is missing something fundamental about life. And here's the irony, the rest of my family, my parents and my brother, are slowly getting pushed out. They're not being included in upcoming family events. In a way, they issued an unspoken ultimatum, either them or my girlfriend. And people chose Yasmin. Because it's better to have her at the party than them. At least Brad still has his in-laws. Just the thought of that makes me feel an overwhelming sense of boredom. Update 4. Let me start by saying, my grandfather is doing well. So this isn't going to be an update about his health. The family's been having gatherings lately, without my parents or my brother. And to be honest, no one seems to miss them. Now people feel more relaxed. And funny enough, Yasmin isn't even the loudest person at these parties anymore. My parents did try to attend one of the gatherings. But at the door, the host told them the event was probably going to be too fun for their liking, and sent them right back the way they came. As for my brother, there's been some news. He's been keeping his distance from his in-laws ever since he lost his job. Yes, he's been unemployed for about 3 months now and is still trying to find something comparable. No, he didn't lose it because of his racism, snobbery, or any of the other isms we know him for. It was just downsizing and budget cuts. Still, his in-laws aren't thrilled that their golden son-in-law is now jobless, and not pulling in a top-tier salary. I know this indirectly, since we don't talk anymore. But from what I've heard, they've stopped inviting him to certain events. Apparently, they don't want to introduce him as the unemployed son-in-law. I don't know how that's affecting his marriage, but I can guess. But hey, if he always believed connections mattered more than genuine relationships, well, now he gets to live that belief. Time to practice what you preach. Update 5. My brother is now happily divorced. But don't worry, his precious connections are still intact. Well, maybe not technically, because those connections belong to his in-laws. And they were the ones who basically made their daughter divorce him. They didn't approve of his new job, it didn't match the prestige of his previous position. Apparently, the pressure from her parents was more powerful than the so-called love they had. Meanwhile, Yasmin and I, we're getting married. We don't have a date yet, but we're engaged. My grandfather is beyond excited for the celebration. He already has big ideas about what the party will look like. He's been listening to Spanish music with my now fiancé, and he says he's going to shake his bones at the wedding. That's a phrase Yasmin taught him. It means to dance. I don't know if Grandpa will actually be able to pull off much dancing, but I doubt anyone's going to tell him no. Worst case scenario? He'll kick a few ankles while trying, and as the oldest person in the family, no one's allowed to get mad at him anyway. We haven't planned anything yet, and we haven't even started thinking about the guest list. But one thing we know for sure. There are certain kinds of people who don't enjoy lively, noisy parties. And those are exactly the people who won't be invited.